Picture this: a city where the money never sleeps, the lights never go out, and the chips keep stacking. For a while, Atlantic City was exactly that. America's answer to Las Vegas, sitting right on the Jersey Shore. And then, quietly, one by one, the lights started going out. That's exactly what we're exploring today: why no one wants to own a casino in Atlantic City anymore. Part 8. The Golden Promise. To understand where things went wrong, you have to understand just how right everything once seemed. In November 1976, New Jersey voters approved a referendum to legalize casino gambling in Atlantic City. It was the first time anywhere in the United States, outside of Nevada, that casino gambling had been given the green light. The city had seen better days. The Miss America pageant was about as exciting as things got by then, and the boardwalk had more splinters than tourists. Atlantic City had once been a genuine resort destination, drawing wealthy vacationers from Philadelphia and New York in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s and 1970s, the city had fallen into serious decline. Hotels that were once prestigious were barely functional. The convention business had dried up. Unemployment was high. The promise of gambling was basically sold as a civic rescue plan. Bring in the casinos, bring back the money, revive the city. And on May 26, 1978, Resorts International opened its doors. People came in droves. There were so many people trying to get through the doors on opening weekend that the crowds were practically beating down the walls. Atlantic City had tapped into something the Northeast hadn't had access to before: legal casino gambling within driving distance of tens of millions of people. Within a year, Resorts International had taken in more money than any casino in Nevada. That number got people's attention fast. By the early 1980s, new casinos were opening along the boardwalk one after another. Each one was a bet that Atlantic City was going to keep growing, keep filling up, keep printing money. The state of New Jersey was collecting hundreds of millions in tax revenue. Tens of thousands of jobs were created, many of them union positions with solid wages and benefits. Construction workers, hospitality staff, dealers, entertainers. Atlantic City had become an economic engine for the entire southern part of the state. And for a long while, it did exactly that. By 2006, Atlantic City's casinos were generating $5.2 billion in gross gaming revenue in a single year. That is not a typo. $5.2 billion. At the time, it was the peak of something that had been building for nearly 3 decades. The city had what New Jersey State Senate President Stephen Sweeney later described simply a monopoly on gaming for 30 years. When you're the only game in town for the entire East Coast, the money just flows. The casinos had also become a cultural touchstone. The boardwalk was a destination. The showrooms were pulling in serious talent. Day trippers from Philadelphia and New York would board buses, spend a day playing the slots, maybe catch a show, and head home. It was affordable entertainment for working class and middle class Americans, and they showed up reliably for decades. But monopolies have a shelf life, and Atlantic City's was running out. Part 7, The Trump Chapter, and what it tells us. No story about Atlantic City's casino era is complete without a detour through the 1980s and 1990s. When Donald Trump decided he was going to conquer the boardwalk, Trump opened his first Atlantic City property, Trump Plaza, in May 1984. Then came Trump Castle, later renamed Trump Marina. And then, in 1990, the main event, the Trump Taj Mahal. Trump purchased the unfinished Taj Mahal from Resorts International in 1988 for $230 million and financed the completion primarily through junk bonds, carrying a 14% interest rate. Even before a single chip was placed on a table, the financial structure was precarious. The Taj Mahal opened on April 2, 1990, billed by Trump as the 8th wonder of the world. Michael Jackson attended the grand opening. New Jersey's governor got a personal tour. It had 120,000 square feet of gaming space, making it the largest casino in Atlantic City at the time. There was a strip club, a hard rock cafe, and a general sense that the future had just arrived in New Jersey. The scale was genuinely staggering. Nothing in Atlantic City had looked like this before, but the debt load was extraordinary from the start. Trump had raised $675 million to complete the casino, mostly at that punishing 14% interest rate. When the gambling industry hit a rough patch shortly after the opening, compounded by a broader recession, those interest payments became nearly impossible to manage. The Taj Mahal filed for bankruptcy in 1991, less than a year after it opened. Think about that. The largest, most expensive, most celebrated casino in the city's history couldn't survive its first year without going to bankruptcy court. A casino analyst named Marvin Rothman had actually seen it coming. Just weeks before the Taj opened, he told the Wall Street Journal that once the novelty wore off and the cold winds blew in from October to February, the market just isn't there. Trump reportedly had Rothman fired from his firm for making that prediction. Rothman later sued and settled. Sometimes being right is its own kind of expensive. Trump's casino operations went on to file for bankruptcy 4 separate times between 1991 and 2014, though Trump himself had sold his personal stake in the company by 2009. The properties changed hands, accumulated debt, shrank their workforces, and kept operating in various states of financial distress. They ended up under the control of billionaire Carl Icahn, who acquired Trump Entertainment Resorts out of bankruptcy in 2016 and reportedly lost close to $350 million trying to keep the Trump Taj Mahal alive. The Taj finally turned off its lights for good on October 10, 2016, the result of a labor dispute with Unite Here, Local 54 over healthcare and pension benefits. More than 2,800 workers lost their jobs that morning. Hard Rock International, owned by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, eventually bought the Taj from Icahn for $50 million, roughly 4 cents on the dollar of its original construction cost. They renovated it substantially and reopened it in June 2018 as the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino Atlantic City. It now operates as one of the city's stronger performers, a genuine turnaround, though one that required essentially rebuilding the place from the inside out. The Trump chapter is instructive precisely because it shows how even properties with enormous investment and enormous brand recognition couldn't survive the structural problems eating away at Atlantic City's foundations. Trump didn't fail because he was uniquely bad at running casinos. He failed because the underlying model, load up on debt, build the biggest thing possible, assume the customers will always come, was exactly the model the entire city had been running on. It wasn't just Trump who failed. It was a whole ecosystem that was beginning to crack. Tourotum Part 6. The walls close in. Competition arrives. Here's the thing about being the only casino destination on the East Coast. It's a great position to be in, right up until someone else opens a casino. For the first few decades, Atlantic City's dominance was essentially geographic. If you lived in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, or anywhere in between, and you wanted to gamble in a proper casino, Atlantic City was your answer. You could take a bus down, spend the day, maybe stay the night, and head home with either a lighter wallet or a good story. The city built its entire economy around that arrangement. Not just the casinos, but the restaurants, hotels, shops, and entertainment venues, all of it predicated on people making that trip. Then, gradually, that arrangement fell apart. Connecticut led the first wave. Foxwoods Resort Casino, operated by the Mashantucket Pequot tribe, opened in 1986 and expanded dramatically through the early 1990s. Mohegan Sun followed in 1996. Suddenly, New Yorkers and New Englanders had options that didn't require a trip to the Jersey Shore. Atlantic City took note and then largely went back to business as usual. But the really decisive blow came in 2006, when Pennsylvania granted casino licenses and slot machines began appearing in the Philadelphia metro area. This wasn't a distant competitor. This was Atlantic City's backyard. Within a few years, Pennsylvania had passed New Jersey as the second highest earning casino state in the country, behind only Nevada. The Philadelphia market, which had historically been one of Atlantic City's most reliable sources of day trippers, essentially vanished. People who had been buzzing down to Atlantic City for 30 years suddenly had a casino 20 minutes from home. Why make the longer trip? As Wayne Whites, a managing director at restructuring firm Gavin/Salamanese, put it plainly, you're not going to AC for the casino. You can get the casino elsewhere. Maryland, Ohio, and eventually Massachusetts all followed. The Northeast, that had once funneled gambling money exclusively through Atlantic City, was now saturated with options. Every new casino that opened somewhere else was another slice carved out of Atlantic City's customer base. And crucially, those customers didn't need to drive far. The whole appeal of Atlantic City had always been rooted in convenience. When convenient gambling was available 15 minutes from home, the math changed completely. There was also a subtler shift happening simultaneously. The casino-going demographic was aging. The generation that grew up treating Atlantic City as their local gambling destination was getting older, and younger gamblers weren't necessarily replacing them in the same numbers. The cultural moment that Atlantic City had thrived on for 3 decades was quietly passing. By 2014, Atlantic City's gaming revenue had fallen to roughly $2.5 billion, less than half of its 2006 peak. The city that once dominated East Coast gambling had lost half its revenue in under a decade, not because of anything sudden or dramatic, but because the world around it had changed and it hadn't kept up. Part 5. The year everything fell apart, 2014. If there was a single year that crystallized the crisis, it was 2014. In a span of 9 months, 4 of Atlantic City's 12 casinos shut their doors. The Atlantic Club went first, closing on January 13th. The Showboat followed on August 31st. Then Revel on September 2nd, and Trump Plaza on September 16th. 8,000 workers lost their jobs. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics named the Atlantic City metro area as the one that had lost more jobs than any other metropolitan area in the country over the previous 12 months. A staggering 9,900 positions gone. Miss America contestants arrived at the Atlantic City Convention Center on the same day that thousands of newly unemployed casino workers were lining up at the same building to file for unemployment benefits. That image captures the moment pretty well. Each closure had its own specific story, but they all shared the same underlying logic. Too many casinos, too few customers, and not enough reinvestment in the properties to give people a compelling reason to make the trip. The Showboat had been a Caesars Entertainment property, and Caesars, itself facing an enormous debt load that would drive it into bankruptcy in early 2015, simply decided it couldn't afford to keep the lights on there. The Atlantic Club, formerly known as the Atlantic City Hilton, had changed hands multiple times and never found a stable identity or ownership structure willing to invest in its future. Trump Plaza, by the time it closed, was the worst performing casino in the entire city, month after month. The building had visibly deteriorated. Carly Khan, who held the mortgage, had reportedly been trying to find a buyer for years. There were none. The closures were devastating for the workforce, but in a strange way, they were also overdue. The market had been oversaturated for years. There simply wasn't enough gambling business to support 12 casinos in one city when competition had spread across the entire Northeast. The properties that survived generally came out stronger because there were fewer competitors dividing the available customers. But the damage to Atlantic City's reputation was significant. When 4 casinos close in a single year, the story stops being about individual businesses and starts being about a city in freefall. Investors noticed, and then there was Revel. Revel deserves its own section. Part 4, The Revel, a $2.4 billion cautionary tale. If you want one story that captures just how far gone Atlantic City's casino market had become by the early 2010s, you look at the Revel. Construction on the Revel began in 2007, backed by Morgan Stanley to the tune of $1.25 billion. Then, the Great Recession hit. Morgan Stanley pulled out in April 2010, declaring a $932 million loss. The project sat unfinished on the boardwalk, a half-built tower that became a visible symbol of bad timing and worse planning. Most rational observers would have let it die there. Rather than let it die, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie stepped in and announced that the state would provide up to $261 million in tax incentives to get the project completed, essentially a public subsidy for a private casino. Supporters argued it would create thousands of jobs and inject new energy into the city. By February 2011, a new $1.15 billion financing package was assembled. The Revel opened on April 2, 2012, at a total construction cost of $2.4 billion. It was Atlantic City's first new casino since the Borgata opened in 2003, and it was the tallest building in New Jersey at the time. And from day one, it struggled. The design itself was baffling. Guests who wanted to gamble had to ride a steep escalator from the lobby just to reach the casino floor. An unusual layout that frustrated visitors who just wanted to sit down at a machine. Revel had also made the unusual decision to ban smoking entirely, which alienated a significant portion of Atlantic City's core casino-going demographic. There was no traditional buffet, a staple of the day tripper experience. No bus trip promotions, no players club at launch. It had positioned itself as a high-end resort catering to Wall Street types and hedge fund executives, a clientele that, as it turned out, simply wasn't interested in making weekend trips to Atlantic City in the numbers needed to justify a $2.4 billion investment. Alan Wensky, CEO of Gaming USA Corporation, noted bluntly that the Revel was consistently the second to last every month in gambling revenue. Last place, for the record, went to Trump Plaza, also closing that same September. In its first month of operation, the Revel took in $13 million in casino winnings, placing it near the bottom of all 12 Atlantic City casinos. It stayed near the bottom for its entire existence. By August 2012, Moody's and Standard & Poor's had both downgraded its credit. By November, casino officials were warning federal regulators that the debt load of over $1.3 billion could lead to bankruptcy or foreclosure if revenues didn't improve. Revel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in early 2013, less than a year after opening. It emerged from that bankruptcy, tried to stabilize, cut prices, added a smoking area, and attempted to attract a more realistic customer base. None of it moved the needle significantly. The Revel filed for bankruptcy again in June 2014. When no suitable buyer came forward by summer, it closed on September 2, 2014, just 2.5 years after its grand opening. The Architect's newspaper later described it as a shining example of a totally misguided and inappropriate concept, built at the wrong time and in the wrong place. After the closure, the property sat dark and empty for months. A Florida developer named Glenn Straub eventually purchased it for $82 million, roughly 3 cents on the dollar of its $2.4 billion construction cost. Straub floated an assortment of repurposing ideas over the following years: a water park, a rope climbing course, an equestrian facility, a heliport, even a windsurfing center. None of his plans came to fruition. He ultimately sold the property for $200 million to a Colorado developer named Bruce Defick in early 2018, who reopened it as Ocean Casino Resort that June. So, a property that cost $2.4 billion to build sold for $82 million, then resold for $200 million. Morgan Stanley alone walked away from nearly $1 billion. The state's promised tax incentives were never actually paid. The workers lost their jobs, and Atlantic City was left with a cautionary tale that will follow it for decades. A monument to the idea that if you build it, they will come, even when every piece of evidence suggests otherwise. Morgan Stanley alone walked away from nearly $1 billion. The state's promised tax incentives were never actually paid. The workers lost their jobs, and Atlantic City was left with a cautionary tale that will follow it for decades. A monument to the idea that if you build it, they will come, even when every piece of evidence suggests otherwise. Part 3. The deeper problem. A city that stopped evolving. The competition from neighboring states made things harder. The debt-fueled overbuilding made things worse. But the deeper, quieter problem running through all of it was one of complacency. Atlantic City spent decades as the only game in town and, in many ways, acted like it would stay that way forever. While Las Vegas was reinventing itself throughout the 1990s and 2000s, adding world-class restaurants, luxury shopping, elaborate entertainment, themed hotels, and experiences designed to make the trip worth it regardless of whether you gambled. Atlantic City largely kept doing what it had always done. Most of its operators ran what one hotel industry commentator bluntly called glorified slot parlors, making minimal investment in their properties and relying on day trippers to keep the revenues flowing. The thinking was essentially, why spend money improving the product when people are coming anyway? That logic worked until it didn't. The business model that made Atlantic City rich in the early years, bus trips from New York and Philadelphia, coin buckets at the slots, a cheap buffet, and a bus ride home, was never going to survive once local competition arrived. Slot machines 15 minutes from home beat slot machines 2 hours away every single time, but very few operators looked up from the short-term revenue long enough to ask the obvious longer-term question: what happens when those day trippers can gamble at home? There were some notable exceptions. The Borgata, which opened in 2003, was built as a genuine destination resort, upscale restaurants, a full spa, a concert venue that attracted major acts, and hotel rooms that gave people a reason to stay overnight rather than just passing through. It became the city's top-grossing casino and largely maintained that position even through the turbulent years that followed. Harrah's invested in an elaborate indoor pool complex. Tropicana expanded its dining and retail offerings. These operators understood that a casino floor alone wasn't enough anymore, but for every Borgata, there were multiple properties that simply kept the lights on and hoped the buses kept coming. The city's own finances compounded everything. Atlantic City's municipal finances were a long-running disaster, in part because the casinos spent years legally contesting their property tax assessments and winning, resulting in enormous tax refunds that drained the city's treasury. In June 2014, the Borgata alone received a settlement refund of more than $88 million from the city. Multiply that dynamic across multiple casinos over multiple years, and you can understand why the city's finances were perpetually in crisis. Roads crumbled. Neighborhoods beyond the boardwalk remained deeply impoverished. The poverty rate was among the highest in New Jersey. By 2019, the Atlantic City area had the highest rate of home foreclosures in the entire country. The casinos sat on the boardwalk like a brightly lit island surrounded by a very different reality. Day trippers would arrive, walk straight into a casino, spend the day, and leave, without ever seeing much of the actual city. The community's promised revival kept waiting, and the casinos, for their part, kept pointing to employment figures and tax revenues as evidence of their contribution, while the neighborhoods just beyond their parking lots told a different story. Part 2. The next threat, New York is coming. Just when Atlantic City appeared to be finding some equilibrium, 9 casinos still standing, revenues stabilizing, online gambling and sports betting adding new income streams, the next existential threat arrived, and this one is harder to dismiss than all the previous ones combined. New York State has been moving to award 3 full-scale casino licenses for the downstate New York area, including New York City itself. Companies like MGM Resorts, Las Vegas Sands, Caesars, and Hard Rock have been competing aggressively for these licenses, each prepared to invest billions to build integrated resort casinos in what is widely considered the largest untapped gaming market in the United States. Each license comes with a $500 million fee just for the right to operate. New York City and its suburbs represent Atlantic City's single most important remaining feeder market. The people who have been making that drive down the Garden State Parkway on weekends are, overwhelmingly, New York area residents. A multi-billion-dollar resort casino 20 minutes from Midtown Manhattan is a completely different proposition from a trip to the Jersey Shore. Connecticut pulled New England away. Pennsylvania pulled Philadelphia away. New York would pull away the last major population center that Atlantic City has reliably depended on. The numbers tell part of the story already. By early 2026, total gaming revenue for New Jersey, including online gambling and sports betting, had climbed to nearly $7 billion annually. But in-person casino revenue at Atlantic City's physical properties was essentially flat, and in some months declining. Online slots were generating more revenue than the physical casino floors, a crossover that first happened in late 2024 and continued into 2025. And while all 9 casinos remained profitable, profits had declined nearly 10% from the previous year, even as total revenue rose, as operating costs climbed faster than income. The 9 casinos still operating are all profitable, which is a real recovery story from the carnage of 2014. But profitability and durability are different things. The question of whether Atlantic City's existing properties, aging, underinvested relative to what's coming, can compete for customers against billion-dollar New York resorts is one nobody in the industry is answering with much confidence. Part 1. Where things stand. So where does that leave Atlantic City today? The city still has 9 casinos. It still draws roughly 18 million visitors a year. It still employs over 22,000 people in the casino industry, making it one of the largest private sector employers in South Jersey. The boardwalk is still there. The ocean is still there. The saltwater taffy, famously invented in the city in the late 19th century, is still very much there and doing fine. And to be fair, some of what's happened in Atlantic City over the past decade is a genuine recovery story. Hard Rock gutted and rebuilt the former Trump Taj Mahal into something people actually want to visit. Ocean Casino Resort, the property that rose from the Revel's ruins, has found its footing. Sports betting, legalized in New Jersey in 2018, created a meaningful new revenue stream. Online gambling, which New Jersey was early to legalize, added hundreds of millions in annual tax revenue. The casinos that survived did so largely by adapting, adding entertainment, investing in their hotels, launching online platforms, and offering experiences that gave customers a reason to show up in person. But the era of Atlantic City as a dominant, unchallenged destination, the era that generated both the fortunes and the spectacular failures in roughly equal measure, is clearly over. Ownership has consolidated into a revolving door of corporate groups. MGM Resorts owns the Borgata, Caesars Entertainment controls Bally's, Caesars, and Harrah's. Hard Rock International runs the former Trump Taj Mahal. Ocean Casino Resort operates where the Revel once burned through $2.4 billion. The individuals who built these properties in the 1970s and 1980s with grand visions of permanent prosperity are largely gone, replaced by corporations that manage their Atlantic City holdings as line items in much larger national portfolios, not as the crown jewels they once were. Buying a casino in Atlantic City today means buying into a market with flat in-person traffic, growing online competition, aging physical infrastructure, a complicated regulatory environment, and the near-certain knowledge that New York City is about to enter the game with resources that no Atlantic City property can realistically match. It means taking on a property in a city that still hasn't fully solved the problem of being more than just its boardwalk. That's a hard sell for any investor with options. And right now, investors with options have plenty of them elsewhere. Atlantic City's story isn't really just about casinos. It's about what happens when a city bets everything on a single industry, rides that bet all the way to the top, and then watches the world change faster than it can adapt. The monopoly that made it rich was always temporary. The window to diversify, to build a city that could stand on its own beyond the boardwalk, was open for years before anyone took it seriously enough to walk through it. The boardwalk is still beautiful. The ocean hasn't moved. Some of those 9 casinos are genuinely trying to build something sustainable, and a few of them are succeeding. But the days when investors were lining up to plant a flag on the Jersey Shore and watch the money roll in, those days are gone, and they're not coming back. And that's exactly why no one wants to own a casino in Atlantic City anymore. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button and subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from.